Hey, Stand Up Memories has a new sponsor.
Don't forget the discount.
It's the Cycling Frog, and they make seltzer and iced tea lemonade that has THC and CBD in it, and it's all the buzz without alcohol. How cool is that?
And it's delicious, and you get 20% off if you use the discount code
SUM20.
SUM20.
SUM, which stands for Stand Up Memories, 20% off, SUM20, and get your Cycling Frog at cyclingfrog.com.
Cyclingfrog.com.
You know what?
I don't know about you, but I am sick and tired of how pampered we are. The treatment we get is
The
just
treatment we get is tremendous.
spectacular.
And I got to tell you something.
Go ahead.
If I called Hollywood Central Casting and I wanted to cast a guy who's a brilliant writer, humorist, comedian, with just
Thank you. That's so nice.
No, I'm
Peter.
not talking about you. I'm talking about our guest. The perfect background. You see the couch where a naked woman just before the camera went on, got up and left the room, and all and the creativity that goes on in that room. There's drums in the background. Ladies and gentlemen, we have on our show a man who is all of those things I just mentioned, Mr. Bill Scheft.
Is that? I didn't recognize you without a cigar.
Yeah, well, that ended about 30 years ago.
Good,
I
good,
saw-
good.
It
That's
was
good.
30 years ago, which is probably that's probably the last time I saw Peter. The last time I saw you was at the Friars on a cigar and dirty joke night. And I told a golf joke and it went over well. And you went up after me and you said, you know, since Bill's golf joke went over so well, I'm going to tell a golf joke. A guy walks into a pro shop. He's got cuts all over his face. And the guy at the pro shop says, "What happened to you?" The guy says, "I blew an eagle." That's your opener. And I ran outside and called everybody I knew because I had never heard that joke.
And I had just heard it, and I'm like, how did we go 70 years without hearing that joke? I don't even play golf, and I know how great a joke it is, you know.
Yeah.
So let's tell our audience, we know you primarily as a stand-up comedian, and of course you're much more than that, but let's start with back in the day, the clubs that you started at, and of course, let's tell our audience that that we're talking to somebody who was a writer and the head writer for David Letterman for how many years?
Okay, first of all, I was not the head writer. I ran the monologue. If I had been the head writer, we would be having this interview from a locked ward. I just ran the monologue. That's all. But I worked on the Letterman show for 24 years, from 91 till the end in 2015. Yeah, I was lucky.
You know, after all this time in this business, to me, it would seem that the monologue writer should be the head writer, because that's the main comedy hunk, you know?
But not really, because the thing about Letterman, when it came on, they received one marching order, which was do not be the Tonight Show. So back at NBC, when it first came on, Dave's monologue was 2 or 3 jokes. And the comedy was all through the rest of the show. You know, Johnny would do the monologue, then he would do like a desk piece, and that was it. But the Letterman show had comedy all throughout the show, even through the guest segments. So the head writer, there was a lot of produced stuff. So that the head writer, you know, it's a big clerical and administrative job. You know, running the monologue was great because I could write the jokes and then I could help put it together with Dave.
Wow, that's terrific.
Now, were you there going back as far as the morning?
No. That the morning show was the summer of 80. I was still a sports writer. I was in Albany, New York, which is, you know, if you've been to Albany, it's not some of God's best work. And I was still a sports writer when I became a comic. And one of the first gigs I did was I was at the Rainy Night House with
Ah,
Peter, and it was 1981 or maybe 82. And I said to Peter, I said, go bet on this. It's 1982. I said, the Daily News will fold within 3 months. Was I right or was I right?
you were right on with that, boy. You didn't miss that prediction. Actually, I think they're hanging on by their fingernails.
Now, my favorite story about you, Peter, I was not there for this, but
Uh-oh.
my late wife, who you both know, Adrienne Tolsch, used to love to tell this story, that she was at the Rainy Night House with you and Kelly Rogers, among other people. And after the show, you and a young woman were talking it up, and
I'm
you were
sure.
and Kelly Rogers walked by you and said, Peter, where are you going to take her? Your coat? Which is
I remember that. I remember that. I had nowhere to take her.
You know, those were horrible. That Rainy Night House, it was like a rite of passage. Everybody passed through there, you know. It was great fun, you know.
it was great fun, and unlike other places that we would play back then, the audience understood why they were there. You know, some
Yeah.
of these places, you know, these Jim Balatzos $55, Jerry Stanley $55 gigs. By the way, everybody got $55 at a Jerry Stanley gig, as you know.
I got 40.
If
Wow.
you drove, but if you drove, you got $15 for gas. If you MC'd, you got an extra $10. So if you drove and MC'd, you made more than the headliner.
Just classic. Oh man.
And part of our pay was a cheeseburger if the cook has time.
Yeah. If the cook, right. That's right. If the
Yeah,
cook,
but the Rainy Night House, they were paying attention and they were into it, and they were an actual comedy audience, as opposed to Jerry Stanley's Ground Round, where there's peanut shells on the floor.
right. The greatest tribute that you could that a Jerry Stanley club owner could give you was to turn the jukebox off once you got on stage. The greatest tribute that you could get. But I remember somebody told me a story about they were emceeing at a Stanley gig, and somebody and the MC's on stage, and he says to the guy, what do you do for a living? And the guy says, I'm in sales. And then the guy says, aren't you going to say, can you be more vague? And whoever's emceeing says, why would I say that? He said, because every week the guy says that.
I love that.
So the audience knew the stock lines were
Right,
coming. I love it.
correct.
I love it. So which city club were you the most comfortable at? Was
Well, I
Comic Strip or Catch or the
No,
Improv?
Catch. Because I auditioned at Catch in December of 1980, and it took me 6 times to pass audition because the woman that ran audition night thought I was funny but arrogant. Not wrong, but 6 times. But as you know, I got even with her because I married her, and that was Adrian was running. But I, Catch was. I was really lucky to be there then, because that was when it was sort of the center of the stand-up universe, and the shows went till 2 a.m. And it was a wonderful experience. And, you got to see people when they were stopping by or coming in. And this is, of course, I would say that I was sort of a half generation after Jerry and Larry Miller and Carol Leifer, so I was probably like 5 years after, maybe a little
at most.
Yeah,
I mean,
and so I got to see him, and of course the first guy that I remember breaking through in terms of monetary was Mark Scheft, because he went out. I think he was opening for Manilow or something like that, and the word came back in 1982. Do you know how much Mark Scheft made last year? $62,000.
And everybody's head exploded.
Yeah, you couldn't believe that. But the great thing about stand-up back then is the further away you went from Manhattan, the more you made. You know,
Right.
you went to Jersey for Jerry Stanley, you got 55. If you went to Long Island, you got 40, and you might get a cheeseburger. But yeah,
Well, that's true, but that makes sense because supply and demand. There were lots more comedians in Manhattan wanting to get on.
yeah, it absolutely made sense. And you were doing more time out there.
That's right. You were doing more time, but you saw Catch a Rising Star when they had music acts in between the
Yeah,
comedians.
they on during the week we would have, I think, like two singers or maybe three when the shows went till two, and on the weekend shows we had one on the early show and two on the late show. And of course, the great thing about singers were, you put them right up in the check spot. That was just a beautiful thing. They
Yeah, but
didn't
one of
like
those
each other.
singers was none other than Pat Benatar.
Well,
Remember? How
Pat
great-
Benatar was there, and of course, Rick Newman, who, as Bill Maher said, built Catch a Rising Star with his own two faces. Bill Maher, Rick Newman wanted her to sing just show tunes, which is that's it. But my favorite story about Rick Newman is when Catch had been open for 5 years, they did a midnight special there. 5-year anniversary of Catch, and Patty was on it, Belzer, Adrian, David Say, and I think like David Brenner, and they're interviewing Rick Newman, and they say, Rick, you've been open now for 5 years. How many people would you say have been on stage at Catch a Rising Star? And Newman says 50,000. And then the guy keeps going, and of that number, how many would you say have made it? And Rick Newman says half. So 20,000 people had their own series. And,
And no problem with that.
Oh, I love it. I love it. I love it.
He was such a character, a very close friend of mine passed away, not to be a downer, but when I heard about Catch a Rising Star in the Times, I was still a musician, but I heard people can get up and do 5 minutes. So I thought this is exciting. So I put together the best 6 pages I could possibly put together. And this guy that passed away, I grabbed him from my mother's kitchen table and said, come out to the car. I want to read you what I'm going to do at Catch a Rising Star. And I read it to him. And he said, that is the funniest thing I've ever heard in my life. Holy mackerel, is that great? And I waited in line at Catch. And I went up and did those jokes. And I can't tell you how badly I bombed. And even though he passed away, I'm still pissed off.
That's hilarious. And it was, to me, I got a great training because I was made an MC very early in my alleged career as a stand-up. And so you're up and down all night and you're working with the audience. And, the MCs at Catch, they booked the show. So you had a lot of power, which luckily I didn't corrupt too much. But when I think about MCs and doing time with the audience, I mean, Belzer was amazing. I mean, there's a famous, I wasn't there that night, but some guy in the audience stood up and challenged Belzer to a fight. And he said, yeah, babe, why don't you go out on the sidewalk and practice falling down? And I'll be right out. But when Adrian, the day after she passed away, and it's 8 years ago in December, a guy reminded me of a great line she did with the audience. One night she's working the crowd and she sees a young couple up front and she says, are you married? And the guy says, yes. And she says, how long? The guy says 3 years. And she says, any kids? And the guy says, no, but we're working on it. And she said, well, why don't you try turning her over, sir? And
That's a great line. Belzer developed so many lines as an MC that later on in his career, when he did them, people thought, well, that's a stock line. Why is Belzer doing the stock line?
They get adopted. They
Yeah.
get adopted pretty.
He created it.
yeah,
He was simply amazing. And let me just say this real quick. Adrian Tulsh, Bill's wife, was the first comedian who had made it in the scene, established, to take me aside as a newbie at the comic strip and say some nice things to me about, you know, how things are going. I just had a tough set, and I'll never forget that, because it is so tough starting out.
So in other words,
So
if
have
she
her
hadn't
come
done
over.
that, you might not be here.
Well, I mean, I don't know about that, but because I have a high tolerance for pain,
Obviously.
but
No, I think he'd be there right now
I
in that
think I'd
pit.
beat
Yeah,
it. No, but I mean, it was just nice. And she was that kind of a person, and such a wonderful, wonderful comedian. And like Bill says, they ran the show late. They were developing comedians. They didn't care if people were drinking. If there was a body in the room, they'd put you up for two people.
right. And when we would go out on the road, when the all of a sudden you could make a career and all the clubs open on the road, and the first couple nights you'd work it'd be a light audience just because they were new or whatever. And I can't tell you how many club owners said to me, the acts from New York, they don't care if there's 6 people in the audience. I said, yeah, because we spend the first 2 years playing to 6 people in the audience. And,
So it's common.
The comics from LA be like, I don't need this, but what I think a lot, I'm reminded of a lot of Adrian's lines. That one was that she used to say, I went out with a lot of Jewish men. I went out with a guy who was so Jewish, he lived with another guy's mother. And I just,
good one. Good one.
I
Good
love
one. Good
that.
one. I want to say to a lot of young comedians watch our podcast. And what Bill said about emceeing and how you can learn and how you have multiple cracks at the crowd in between the acts and how you can work new material and just the stage time you get is so valuable. And I can't stand when comedians, especially ones starting out, are snooty about being asked to MC.
yeah,
It should be a privilege.
yeah. Well, there were 3 house MCs when I started: Adrian, JJ Wall, and Bill Maher. And then when Bill did well on the Tonight Show and decided to move to LA, I essentially replaced him. And then JJ moved to LA, and Larry Amoros, who I know you guys know, he replaced JJ. And I think very fondly, it was 5 or 6 years. I spent just about every night of my life there. And, and it was a real meeting place for us. It was a real gathering place. And, look, you didn't want to hang out. You didn't want to, wait and maybe I'll go on and maybe I want, but you kind of did, because that's where we convened. And it was, there's nothing like that. There's nothing like that now.
No, I guess there isn't.
There hasn't been for a long time.
And then after the show, you went to the Green Kitchen.
That's right. I ate at the Green Kitchen every night for 5 years, every night at 4. Yeah. And I'm trying to think. One time, Adrian, when she was working at the Strip, she started, like a lot of people, she was a comic and she worked in the coat check. And so she went on late, and Jackie Mason came in and saw her. And after she get off stage, Jackie Mason said to her, you're very funny. Do you want to have an affair with me? And Adrian said, will it help my career? And he says, no. And she said, well, then forget it. 2 hours later, 2 hours later, she's at the Green Kitchen with whoever she was at, with a couple of comics. And the guy at the cash register says, goes over to Adrian, says, there's a phone call for you. And Adrian picks up the phone. She says, hello. Jackie Mason is in the phone booth on the corner of 77. He says, are you sure you don't want to have an affair with me? 2 hours later.
And that is so unbelievably believable.
Yeah.
He was
Persistent.
he was a hawk,
Yeah. Somebody reminded me of a Larry David heckler comeback. He's on stage at the Improv, and he's just, it's Larry. He's bombing, and some guy in the audience yells out, "Hey, your mother fucked my dog. And Larry said, well, I'm sure your dog didn't like it. And
Jeez. Oh.
Oh my goodness. My goodness.
You know, that Catch a Rising Star was so intimidating. Like coming in there and waiting online to get a number to try and get on. And you'd be sitting there waiting for the numbers to go through. And all of a sudden, you're 2 numbers away and it's only 11:45. And you think you're actually going to work to somebody. And all of a sudden, here's Richie Gerstein or here's David Brenner. And they'd get up and do an hour.
right.
And when they walked off, the place would empty and you worked to 4 people and it was just so disheartening.
But what people don't understand about Catch a Rising Star is you knew where you were in the pecking order. And I saw multiple times somebody like Jerry Seinfeld is next. He's going to be on in a couple minutes. The door opens, Belzer walks in, Jerry
Right.
sits down. He totally understands.
Right. But also while I was there, you know, comedy became bigger. And so there were more like auditions. So as an MC, you couldn't always put up the acts you want. You wanted
Right.
to because people were in to see other people. And, you know, you couldn't deprive them of that. So one night, and it's packed, and I got to put somebody on at 10 o'clock that really should not be on at 10 o'clock, but somebody's in to see him.
Yeah.
And he starts in and they start leaving. If you remember Catch a Rising Star, if you see that, there was one door out about
Yep.
as big as that thing, right? So there's one door and people start leaving. And I mean, it's at
Yeah.
that door walking out, it's 3 across and 6 deep. And I'm sitting over here at the MC's chair and it's just a stream of people walking out. And from the other way, I see like a foot and then a hand and then another hand. It's a head. It's Jimmy Valley. And he's coming through all these people leaving. He finally gets through. And he comes up to me and said, I had a little trouble getting in. How's he doing?
Were you there, Bill? Were you at Catch a Rising Star the night an audience member threw a glass at Jerry Seinfeld? Were
No.
you there that night? I will never forget that night. It was, you can imagine this.
Why'd you throw it?
I didn't throw it, but I was there. And you know how
You can
what-
tell us. Enough time has passed. You can tell us why you threw
I
it.
got, I'll tell you what, no. Bill is describing that young comics are not going to understand this, but Catch a Rising Star would keep going. The audience would break, and comics don't want it to break because you want to get on before it would break. And so, but the audience broke, and Seinfeld was next, and he wanted to go up and try new material. And he's not famous yet, but he's Jerry Seinfeld, darn well known in the city and highly respected. And he goes up, and it was really half a room. Remember towards the bar, that half was pretty populated and laughing at Jerry. And then on the left side, there was one table in the middle of nothing.
Kind of no man's land.
That's just kind of how they broke that night. And Jerry is doing well for the audience that stayed, half the audience. And that table is ignoring him and talking loudly, really rudely. And Jerry, being Jerry, turned over to the table and he goes, basically, would you please be quiet? These people are enjoying my show and I'd like to continue. He kind of condescending the way, you know, Jerry could be.
Really?
And he goes back.
Wow, Jerry. Wow, you think you know a guy.
So he goes back to his act and 15 seconds go by and a glass comes flying from that direction, missed him by maybe 2 feet and crashes against the back wall. And Jerry, I thought he was going to walk off. He stayed up there and looked at the bar waiting for somebody to come in and throw this table out. And the bartender comes in and walks to the table and everybody's quiet and shocked and watching this. And the bartender leans over to the table, and you're going to figure out the ending before I say it. The bartender leans over to the table and you see him talking at the table. And the bartender walks to the stage and says, Jerry, you have to come with me now. And he escorted Jerry off the stage and into the bar. And
You could do that in math.
And
Well, it was probably some, probably some mob guy. It was probably some mob guy like, Joey Zipper or so. I remember, and by the time I got there, the mob, had just moved out, and you'll pardon the expression, Richard Fields came in. Eddie Rabin once had a great line. He said, "I just saw Rick Newman's favorite movie, Killing Fields." But at any rate, so Adrian would say the day after the mob left, the Board of Health came in and they saw that the sprinkler system was painted on the ceiling. So all that protection, but they would still come in. The mob would still come in because they could.
they
But
felt
you'd be
sanctioned.
emceeing, and you would say, "Well, there's a well-dressed gentleman over here. Hi, sir. Where are you from?" And you would just hear "next," and it's like, okay, that's a mob guy.
Hey, Bill, I'm getting signals here. We really want to have you on again. This man is a novelist, a sports writer. We haven't even touched that.
Yeah, I feel like we barely
Yeah,
scraped the surface here.
this time flew by, and we'd love to get you on again. Will you do it? Will you?
Well, how can I put this subtly? I'm available.
And so are we. So
That's right. So are we. You are absolutely, back then and now, so funny. Today's show was about you being a stand-up, but you've had a diverse life. This guy's been sports writer, a novelist, and were you a female impersonator in New Orleans for a while?
Well, one of several, but yes.
Hey, Bill Scheft, you are so funny and terrific. Thank you for coming on Stand Up Memories.
My pleasure. Thanks. Good to see you guys. Take
see you
care.
next time.
All right.